joined The New Yorker as art editor in 1993 and was the founder, publisher, and designer of the pioneering avant-garde comics anthology Raw. She has been the publisher and editorial director of TOON Books since its launch in 2008. Francoise?
Thank you so much, Ian. It's a pleasure to be here. Next. Welcome to TOON Books and to our program Tune Into Reading. It's a program targeted to the elementary school to use from grades kindergarten to 3. As you yourself, Ian, have said, it is a literacy tool to teach kids not only how to read, but also how to love to read, because that's the love that we want to share. Next. I want to go to a short history of comics. Comic book started around World War II, and from the inception they were extremely popular with children. By the 50s, over 90% of the children grew up reading and loving comics, but just as quickly they were denounced by some of the educators due to the excesses that happened in the publishing of horror comics and many of the kids' comics. There was no oversight, there was no rating system or ranking system. And the psychiatrist, Dr. Wortham, denounced comics as bad for children. There were book burning, comic book burnings, there were congressional hearings in 1954. And the educators who were the ones that were pulling comics out of the children's hands, 50 years later, many of them as the one who were at the forefront of the reintroduction of comics for kids that has taken place over the years. Next. It has started with a rehabilitation of the medium itself. Comics are for me a very personal love affair. First of all, I'm married to a cartoonist, Art Spiegelman. He's the author of Mouse, which is basically a long comic book about his parents' experience during World War II and going through the Holocaust. And Mouse was a groundbreaking work, and it, under the euphemism of graphic novel, has been very central to the rehabilitation of the medium, so that now we have graphic novels being shown in museums, and we have them in libraries and in bookstores, and they are re-legitimized. But whereas many years ago when I was publishing Raw magazine and Art was doing Mouse, we were saying comics are not just for kids. We ended up with our own children realizing that it was just as important 50 years later to say comics are not just for adults. We need to have good comic for kids. For me, it was something I discovered when my children were learning to read, how comics put them in the driver's seat. Even when we're reading to them, they had something to look at. Next. For the Tune Into Reading program, we're using a step-by-step approach. We're using increasingly complex visual strategy to get the child to move from his love of picture books to being able to read by himself in chapter books, and comics are an extraordinarily useful tool for that. Next. In our level 1 books, we lay the foundation of visual literacy and of literacy in general. So the level 1 books are done for the 5 to 6 year old, and the story is appropriate for a young child, which is hard to find in comics or in good literary works in general. But this is a book, Little Mouse by Jeff Smith, is a book about a little mouse getting dressed, which is a subject of interest for such a young child. And it is approached on a step-by-step basis, sometimes just 1 panel per page, sometimes 2 panels per page. And it shows the child the foundation of reading, such as the left to right movement, the fact that in a comic the words are a transcription of what somebody is saying, So the balloon is a very good visual metaphor for that. Next, Jeff Smith, the author of Little Mouse, is also the author of a beloved comic book for children, which is Bone. And his background is as an animator. So he uses in his comics the movement from left to right, but also the facial expression. So the child is drawn into the book and not only wants to know what is happening, but also is hooked by the emotional quality of what the character is experiencing. I think it's important to, that's why we turn to such top authors and cartoonists, because a good cartoonist has a kind of magic wand in his hand in terms of drawing you into his world and into his story. Next, in our level 2 books, we start using more complex layout, and those are very good for first and second graders. And we can put more panels per page. They're in a vertical format. We also work with educators from a controlled vocabulary list. I mean, the Dolch words and the words that would be appropriate for a first grader. But thanks to comics, we can introduce higher level words, such as here, for example, on the upper right hand, the word pirate is not a word that a child that age would be familiar with, but we give multiple visual clues when we first introduce it, so that Benny is a pirate, is wearing a pirate hat, is picturing himself in a pirate boat that's flying a pirate flag, and it becomes easier for the child to learn that way. We also use sound effects such as a bump in the lower right-hand panel, and all of the syntax of visual communication that comics can provide. Next. We have received for our books, actually in 2010, the Geisel Award, which is given to the best book for beginning readers in the English language from the ALA. It's the highest honor a beginning reader could get, and we're extremely proud of it. Susan Welford was the chair of the committee that gave this award. Was explaining how she feels that TOON book expands the boundary of what can be done with beginning readers. And it's true that comics simplify and bridge many of the issues that keeps kids from getting involved with books. Comics, as Dr. Tversky, was professor of psychology at Stanford University, one of our advisors, has said, comics use a broad range of sophisticated devices for communication. And in that sense, it's similar to face-to-face interactions, in which meaning is derived not solely from the words, but also from the gestures, from the intonation, from facial expression, and from the props. Similarly, in comics, we can parallel that, for example, in the spread from the Geisel Award-winning Benny and Penny, when the mice in the middle of the page on the left are surprised, we use a sweat line. We use the round eyes that shows extreme surprise. And when they run, we use speed line. And the author can actually have a panel that has an exploded star-like burst, so that the sound is louder and the type itself can become bolder and bigger. And on the next page we can have the sound effects of the flap, flap, flap. And when Benny is whispering to his sister, "Hush, Penny," the lines of the balloons are done as dotted line. All of these visual metaphors that the child is invited to recognize and to put together towards a coherent, meaningful story. So we can have not just the bold action of this mystery that is a big no-no, but all of the emotional involvement that one experiences when you extract meaning from the text. Next. One of the ancillary pleasure, but essential pleasure of reading is that making sense of the text, deciphering what the picture and the words say, and comics lend themselves to a lot of visual jokes. For example, in this new Benny and Penny book that we just published, there is a panel upside down, and every child immediately wants to turn the book upside down to see things from the bird's, from the upside down mouse's point of view. That kind of deciphering, reading, understanding the content is an absolute. My husband at Art Spiegel has talked about comics as a gateway drug for literacy. Kids get hooked on it, on the understanding of it. Next. The books are geared to emerging readers, but as every librarian and teacher will know, comics are also extremely helpful for anyone who's ever dealt with a reluctant reader because, again, of that ability for the child to make sense on his own. Our level 3, we actually follow the curriculum of grade 2 and 3, and we just published a nonfiction TOON book, but the facts are being tethered and introduced through a compelling narrative with characters and little aliens. And to talk about how comics are great to get your kids involved in reading and loving to read, the author reading a book on the left is our daughter Naja. Next. In the Benny and Penny's nonfiction book, we don't use a didactic approach. We let the reader draw their own conclusions. So even though the book presents the element of an understanding of the food chain, for example, but without ever spelling it out, it's up to the reader to make it, to read the sense into it. Next. One very important pleasure of reading and of reading comics is to go back to them and reread. Everybody knows that any kid that has a comics collection just read them over and over again because there's a lot of elements that tells a story, so one can go back and retell and rediscover new details, like here in this page from Stinky by Eleanor Davis, which also got the Guys Dell honor. When the character falls into the hole, the second or the third time you might be discovering the ancillary characters that are cheering on the main character. All of the details that contribute and be more involved, yet again, at each rereading. Next. We are aware of the difficulty to use a medium that has had such a bad name, such as comics or graphic novel, if you want to call them that, in an educational context, and how there might be parents or educators that are not aware of the possibilities of the medium. So we have devoted a lot of energy on putting as many free resources as we could on our website. We have some excellent lesson plans and activity sheets that can be downloaded for all our books. This is a level 1 book, Silly Lily, and the 4 seasons we're publishing a follow-up. We do that also like once the kids are into one character, there's another book that they can read with the same character. Next. Which is something that comics have done all throughout their history. We also, on the website as a free resource, we have our books in 5 different languages, including English, Russian, French, Spanish, and Mandarin Chinese, narrated by the author when it's in English and by voice actors, so that it's an extraordinarily useful tool for English language learners, and it takes advantage of the universal visual language and grammar of comics. Next. The other impulse when a child reads comics is that they recognize the hand of the author. They realize that somebody made it, not a machine, and they want to make their own comics. There are many comic book projects started by Michael Bitts throughout the country, and we on our website have a free tool where the kids can make a cartoon, because a young kid, elementary school age kid, to make one image with the caption and the bubble would and the interacting character would already be a great accomplishment. So that's on our website. And next, we really are delighted by all the support that we have received, but next we're very eager to get suggestions, because many of the best things that we have done have come from the dialogues that we have entered into with librarians and educators. So next, I would love it if any of you got in touch with us at mail@toonbooks.com. On our website, there will be linked to that address, and take advantage of all the tools that we have offered there. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Francoise. I'd like to now introduce